Hey there! Welcome to Middle Age Crazy, the show that proves being an adult doesn't have to suck. With your host, Chuck T.
Hey, what's going on out there? It's the Middle Age Crazy Podcast, the show that proves being an adult does not have to suck. I'm your host, Chuck T, and I welcome you. Thanks for tuning in. We're the show on the 1st and 15th of every month that helps interesting people tell their incredible stories. And I gotta say thanks to Big Jess, my guest from last time. Huge influence in the Minneapolis scene as far as hip-hop goes. You gotta go check out some of his music. He's got a website, it's bigjessmusic.com. You can get a ton of stuff on there, a lot of it for free. And of course, we've got a dynamite show for you today, but we gotta get into some business before we cover any of that. So let's cover some business. You can find us on social media at Middle Age Pod. We do the Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. Check us out. And now we have every episode on YouTube as well. So find us on YouTube. If you got to send an email, it's middleagecrazypod@gmail.com. Hit us up. And you know I won't forget to tell you about the hotline, 515-478-3412. Give us a call. Say anything you want. I dare you. Tell us if you think we're cool. Tell us if you think we suck. Call in and tell a stupid story. Suggest a guest, say anything. I want to put you on the show if it's interesting. And speaking of the hotline, we got a special treat for you. My man Travis out of Minneapolis is back for another Travis's Take. You know, if you remember, this is a gentleman, a scholar, a man of taste, a man of intrigue. And he likes to, go off and get a little bit of a soapbox and talk a bunch of shit. So we're going to do that right now with the Travis Take.
Chuck T, what up, G? This is Trav calling you from the cold confines of Minnesota. It's actually rather warm today. Say, I was having a conversation with a buddy of mine the other day, and he informed me that he and his girlfriend had decided to move in together. More accurately, he was moving her into his place. Anyway, I congratulated him on going from eating Stouffer frozen TV dinners every night to having actual meals, and asked what he was going to do with all the money he'd be saving now that he has to purchase far less lotion and Kleenex. And split the rent. He laughed and said, well, nothing's going to change. I'll still be covering the entire rent. To quote the great Abraham Lincoln, I beg your damn pardon? Fact check, there is no evidence that Abe ever said that, but I digress. He informed me that he makes more money than her and it'd only be, quote, the right thing to do, unquote. Help me out here. And maybe this is a question for Crack of Dawn. Am I tripping? I asked if he was in a relationship with a fully functioning, capable fellow adult based on mutual respect and love, or if he was, in fact, someone's legal guardian. I think that offended him. Oh, well. I have a simple philosophy. If you can carry 2,000 pounds, I won't give you 3,000 pounds. That's not fair to you. But I won't give you 1,000 pounds either, because that's not fair to me. If you can carry 2, then you're going to carry 2. You're an adult. I'm interested in partnership, not sponsorship. Capiche? Let me know if I'm totally off base here, bro. And also if I should be charging my 10-year-old son rent. Any odd, I hope all is well with you and that you're killing it in only the way that you can. Peace in the Middle East, or at least that's what Jared Kushner says he's delivering. I'm out.
Travis, thank you for giving us a call on the hotline. If you happen to agree with Travis, or you think he's full of shit, give us a call, 515-478-3412. Say something cool, we'll put you on the show. All right, let's get to my guest. Been waiting to get this friend of mine on the show. I've mentioned a few times that one of the many weird things that I'm into, I am a humongous professional wrestling fan. Been into it since I was a kid. I still follow the business now. I just find it's a very entertaining business, especially if you understand how it works. And even if you just want to hear about the crazy shit, because it's a nutty business, check out Dark Side of the Ring on Vice sometime. Wrestlers killing their families, getting whacked by the mafia, all kinds of crazy shit. But anyway, I digress. When I was in college, I met my guest in a class. We bonded over a love of professional wrestling, and we were in a group that actually ended up starting a professional wrestling organization at the campus, the Cedar Falls Wrestling Alliance. We talk about it a little bit. You hear a little bit behind the scenes how we made that happen, and that kind of kick-started his professional wrestling career. After college, he decided he wanted to become a professional wrestler, got the training, and started to be an independent professional wrestler for the next decade or so. You might know him as Torturous Tony Sly. You might know him as the intellectual punk Tony Sly. I know him as Danny Wagener, the champ. Here we go.
Danny Wagener. I am 43 years old. I live in Ankeny, Iowa, and I was a professional wrestler for 12 years.
Let's get this interview going. It's the Middle Age Crazy Podcast. Got another old friend of mine. I've been dying to get on the show because we share a passion, an interest that most people are embarrassed to admit, but we happen to be pro wrestling junkies. My buddy Danny Wagener was a pro wrestler for 10, 12 years. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
I'm glad to have you, even though you're just across the way here in town. We're all about the
That's
social
true.
distancing here at the show, so I couldn't have you in the studio.
We were social distancing before this happened. You've been in town, what, like 2-3 years now?
Yes. Hey, I came over that one time.
That's true, you did. I forgot about that because you were only here for like a half hour.
Well, Fuller and I had a certain place to go. We had some dollar bills to spend.
That you did, the shoe show.
We do need to catch up, though. I mean, once life comes back to normal, there's always local wrestling shows, and I'm like, oh, I'm going to go check that out, and then I never do because it just doesn't happen. So you and I got to go check a show out.
Yeah, I mean, I still go to the occasional show. My interest and my fandom has definitely waned, but I enjoy going and hanging out with my friends and drinking beers and trying to be anonymous as best I can at a live independent show than I do sitting on my couch and watching a WWE pay-per-view per se.
How long have you been done? When did you hang the boots up?
So my last match was in July of 2017. So I'm coming up on 3 years. And the caveat of that is that, you know, the old adage in pro wrestling is, you know, nobody ever retires, nobody's ever done.
No.
And in that almost nearly 3 years, I haven't had another match. I haven't managed. I haven't ring announced. I haven't commentated. I bought a ticket and come to the shows with my buddies and drank beer and booed the bad guys and cheered for the good guys and had a good laugh. And so, I mean, I legitimately am done. Not everybody can say that. Now, I guess you can never say never. There's always a possibility, but I don't see ever stepping back in the ring again.
Well, it's probably a good idea. You're old as shit.
That's true. And I had planned to be done before I was 40. Unfortunately, I had a run-in with a vending machine 5 years ago in April of 2015, and I tore my Achilles tendon. And so I was on the shelf for 8 months. But I had planned to be done before I turned 40. So
Okay.
I was planning on actually hanging it up in July of 2016. But I came back in January of that year and was like, I want to do it more than just 6 months and be done.
Yeah.
So I thought I'd still have the itch. So I drug it out another year, and that turned out to be fine. It wasn't that bad, but by the time I was done, I was definitely ready to be done.
No, I get it. And it's going to be interesting as we go through this. I hate to say my audience because I just started that and it just sounds kind of pretentious, my audience. But the people that listen to this, I'm guessing a majority are not professional wrestling fans, okay?
That's very understandable.
Okay, and so we might have to dumb it down or smarten them up, as they say, as we go a little bit here. But let's go all the way back to the beginning. You and I met in a class at the University of Northern Iowa in 90-something or other. Like, I don't even remember how long I was at that school.
Yeah, it would have been 98 probably.
98? Okay, cool. In some way or another, you and a group of guys were starting a local federation associated with the school. Okay.
Yeah, we were actually, at one point, we became an official student organization. And we had, quote-unquote, shows that students would come to. They were obviously free. And for the last 2 years, because we were a student organization, we had to have a faculty advisor. And that was a job that no one wanted, except because I had a graduate assistantship, I technically qualified as a faculty advisor.
Oh, Jesus.
But after I graduated in May of 2000, they weren't able to find another faculty advisor. And that was the end of the Cedar Falls Wrestling Alliance as a student organization at UNI.
Yes, it was a real organization. I remember that. That's crazy.
we actually had a budget. We got, like $1,500, $2,000 a year as a budget. So yeah, it was something that would never happen today. I look back on it, and that's probably the craziest part of it. Not the dumb stuff we did on the ring or in the ring or on a trampoline, but the fact that we were a recognized student organization and signed waivers that university attorneys actually drew up and approved.
Oh my God. Was that all that with the budget and everything? Was that after I had left town?
Yeah, that would have probably started in 2000.
Okay.
Because
I distinctly remember having to buy a table that I wanted to put somebody through one time.
Well, here's the thing. The budget was for printing flyers, sidewalk chalk, and then most of it went back to the university to pay the janitorial staff to clean up after our shows. That was most of the budget. So it was basically being kept in-house. It was kind of ridiculous.
Oh, that's hilarious. So I'm assuming, our little federation at school really sparked your interest in taking it further. When did you realize, I want to really get trained and actually do this outside of school in my adult life? When did that happen?
Well, there were some of the guys that had started it and had done it, had went and gotten trained, specifically with Harley Race, and they were out doing it on the independent circuit. But when I finished up in May of 2002, I was like, this was fun, but I'm not going to do this. I don't have the athletic ability. I don't, have a muscular physique, and I didn't think I could handle the pain of just the wear and tear on your body. So I was pretty much done. About a year later, some of my friends that had also been doing it but were not officially trained were on a show in Mason City where, Manly, a small town outside of Mason City, where there were half trained guys, half guys that weren't trained like them. Okay. And I went to the show, and it was at a bar, so I had some, adult beverages. And after the show, I got in the ring, and I was bumping around. I'm like, you know what? I think I could do this. And so I started wrestling on those shows in that, promotion that was, like I said, it was half backyard guys, half trained guys. It was called U.S. Wrestling, USW. And I did that for about a little more than a year before I finally was able to start training in October of 2004, which was like a month before I turned 28. So I got a late start.
Okay, now you got a late start, and breaking into the wrestling business isn't that easy to begin with. I want you to explain two things to the listeners. One, who the fuck Harley Race is, because I know who Harley Race is, but I want you to tell the people who Harley Race is, why he's so important. And two, what you have to do to get into the business. Essentially, you have to be trained first, and what's that process of finding a school?
So Harley Race was a very successful, popular heavyweight champion for the NWA in the 70s and 80s. But in the late 90s, he was probably the most well-known, most famous former wrestler who was training wrestlers in the Midwest at that time. In the late 90s, he had a training center down in Eldon, Missouri. Now, that's not who I trained with, but I had some friends that did, and they hooked me up with a wrestler/trainer, later on promoter, Travis Shillington, who wrestled as T.S. Aggressor, who had a training facility in Algona, Iowa, and that's where I trained with about 5 other guys. There were 6 of us that were in that class that started in October of 2004. But as far as getting into it, thankfully I had some connections from folks that were wrestling, so I went to shows and expressed my interest in training. But I actually had to get a personal loan to train. They gave me a little bit of a discount because I had, done some wrestling on these kind of half backyard shows. But I think the loan I took out for was like $1,500. Okay. To train.
And do they just take anybody's money, or do you gotta, kind of fit the mold or the personality? I mean, do they check you out, or is it like, we'll take your money, and train you, but you ain't going anywhere?
I think there's always been trainers that would take anybody's money, but I'm going to sound like, the old guy yelling at the cloud now. But I think nowadays it's probably more inclusive. They're more likely to, take anybody's money. The class that I was in, like all 6 guys, pretty much brought something to the table. Not everyone was this great physical specimen, but everyone had something. And there were, 4 of us that lasted a number of years. There's 2 of them that are still wrestling. I was the third one to, or I was, I guess, the 4th of the 6 to kind of hang it up. But no, I mean, you had to have some athletic ability. You had to have some type of aptitude for what you did in the ring, and that wasn't just the physical component. That was also the charisma, the showmanship, the ability to engage an audience. And it's like, I was never the, most athletic guy on the show. I was never the guy that had the best physique, but I was, 6'4", larger guy. And I could talk, and I had, some charisma because I had a speech background in college, which is kind of what got me back into pro wrestling, and got me into the backyard stuff at UNI. But I think at that time, they were willing to take people's money, but I think you had to prove that you could stay with it and you could continue learning, continue getting better, and that you had something to contribute, and you weren't just there to pay your money and take up a space or try to, get a sympathy booking.
Sympathy booking? What the fuck is that?
Well, like, hey, you paid us this money to train with us, but you're 5'6", 45 pounds. You don't have a personality, but we're going to find a place for you on our show because
you gave us money.
You paid us this money, and this training academy or school that you went to is associated with this promotion, so the promoter is going to find a spot for you. And I saw that happen. Now, it's not like those people were the center of the show, no. But there was oftentimes the promoter, I think, was guilted into finding them a spot because they had been dedicated and paid this money and come to training and helped tear down the ring and helped set up the ring and came to all these shows. But, in the ring, they were kind of the shits.
Okay. Well, I can see that. How long do you think typically the average training school lasts for somebody?
So we went basically every Saturday and Sunday. We probably went anywhere from 4 to 6 hours, and it probably lasted about 5 to 6 months. I think by March, we were kind of done. We would still work out before shows, but like kind of the formal training. And to back it up a little bit, like once again, sounding like the old guy talking about, walking uphill to school both ways. When I trained, we were in literally a storage area at a lumber yard. Like it was basically big enough for the 18 by 18 foot ring. And we had to tear down the ring each time and set it up each time. And this was also during the middle of the winter. And there was one session where they brought in a gas generator to provide some heat, or gas heater. And the fumes were so bad, we're like, turn it off. We'll just be cold.
Damn. That's some training in Vern Gagne's barn type of shit.
It is. But the thing was, they were lucky enough, a couple years later, probably less than 2 years later, they got a building in Algona where the ring was always set up usually. And so they had a permanent place, and they had couches, and they had a fridge.
Oh, nice.
And they had bathrooms, and they had a shower. And then, they moved to a different facility in Algona, and now they're in Collins, Iowa, so they're closer to the metro. But, when we trained, we didn't have a dedicated facility. So it was definitely different than it is now. And that doesn't mean that the people that have trained in those facilities are softer. There's plenty of them that are tougher than me, but it was definitely a different environment and a different process that we had to go through to get trained.
Now, I heard, kind of in the old days, because, me, I'm kind of a wrestling historian dork type of guy. And you hear all the different stories about the old days of what they would do to you as far as getting into the business. Has that changed a lot, or do they just make you, okay, you got to do like 500 Hindu squats and then run sprints, and then maybe we'll show you how to do a bump at the end of the day? Or do they get into it and show you what the fuck to do?
Yeah, I mean, Travis was not like that at all. And Travis had trained with that old school. Like, he had been trained by Brad Rangens, Wayne Bloom. And as he told us, like, on the first day of training, he's like, yeah, I took my first clothesline from Mr. Perfect, Kurt Hennig. It's like, okay, take my money.
Yeah.
And so I think he went through some of that, but probably, and because he had trained in the mid-'90s, I think. But no, we didn't really have much of that. And I'm not saying that didn't go on at that time, but it's become less and less, I think, every year. And part of it's just like, if you're looking to turn out wrestlers, they need to put that time in to make sure that their physical conditioning and their look is good outside of training. When they're at training, they need to be learning how to do the moves properly, how to do them safely, how to learn ring psychology so that, like I said, you can engage and entertain the fans. That's what that time is meant for. It's not meant for, how many squats can you do? Now, when you show up to training, you need to be in good shape. Like, you need to have that cardio, but you also need to be smart with the time you're training, because if you, there's another phrase or kind of a concept in pro wrestling called your bump card.
Yep.
Meaning, your body has so many bumps it can take, so many little mini car crashes every time you get thrown on the mat or take that collision. And so it's like, if you waste all of those in your first couple years training, then you're not going to have that longevity. And also you're going to do more damage to your body, regardless of whether it's a hobby or a full-on profession.
Interesting. Now, what do they start you out with? Is it just locking up, hitting each other, tossing each other around? I mean, what do you start with? I mean, what's square one at wrestling school?
Why, it's been so long, Chuck. I think lockup, and also learning how to take a bump, how to properly take a back bump, how to kick out your feet and slap the mat and take a flat back bump. And then I think there was probably, early on also learning how to run the ropes. Okay. But yeah, I think definitely locking up and taking a bump were probably, two of the primary building blocks.
Explain what taking a bump is like, because the one thing I love about pro wrestling is you either get it or you don't. There's no wishy-washy in between, folks, right? And you often hear, oh, one, it's fake, two, they know how to fall. Explain how hard the ring really is and what you're doing with a flat back bump. Obviously, you're trying to make it hurt the least amount possible, but you're still getting thrown to the fucking ground.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. I've always detested the word fake when it comes to pro wrestling, because of the fact of, is it choreographed physical entertainment? Yes, but it's not fake. And in addition to the fact that ring is made of metal beams with 2x8s over it and a thin kind of foam padding and then a canvas, so it has some give, but there's not. The rings I wrestled in didn't have springs underneath them, so there was some give, but it definitely would knock the wind out of you, and especially when you're taking that fall as quickly as you could to make it look more severe, more impressive, to make a louder sound. And that was called attacking the mat. Like, try to get down as quick as you can. And I wasn't as athletic as some people. So, I think I bumped decent, but there were definitely people that were better at quote unquote attacking the mat.
What part of your body's taking most of it?
I mean, that's the thing. You try to do it in such a way that the force is distributed as evenly as possible. So that's why you slap out your arms. But yeah, it definitely takes probably the biggest toll on your back and your lower back and knocks the wind out of you, especially when you're not used to it or it's a really big bump.
I was wondering, what was it like the first time somebody hit you with a huge bump?
yeah, I mean, it would knock the wind out of you because you weren't expecting it. Your body wasn't used to it. You know, and that's another thing that it's kind of a catch-22. Like I talked about the bump card. It's like, well, you don't want to take, you know, too many bumps in training, but then you have, Steve Austin always talks about, you know, kind of becoming calloused. Your body becomes calloused. If it's used to taking bumps every night or on a regular basis, your body's going to be more used to it, and it's not going to be as much of a shock to your body. But, you know, most of the people I wrestled with, you know, we would wrestle, you know, I probably wrestled maybe 2 to 4 times a month. Some of them may have wrestled 6 to 8 times a month, but that's not the same as, you know, 4 nights a week or 7 nights a week or whatever, that, you know, people that make a living do it, especially, you know, back in the territory days, you know, before Vince McMahon bought up everything, whereas, you know, their crew typically, well, pre-pandemic, was working like 4 nights a week.
That's fucking bonkers. And that's the other thing that, and it's obviously we're not on this call to have a professional wrestling history lesson, so to speak. We're more focused on your experience, but that's one thing I don't think people realize. That's like why I think becoming a professional wrestler is probably even more difficult than becoming a pro athlete, so to speak, because one, there's really only one major league most of the time. So there's very limited spots. It's not like there's a shitload of, there's not like 15 guys with 30 teams. You know what I mean? There's one spot you can go. And then there's the travel aspect of it, where I don't think people can take that into consideration, how much the motherfuckers have to travel. I couldn't imagine what that must be like on a regular basis. I mean, it had to suck. Yeah, it had to suck getting dumped on your back a bunch and then just driving home 10 minutes.
Well, and that's the thing is that, you know, I traveled some. I didn't travel near as much as, you know, some of my peers did that would, you know, drive to Chicago and get home at, you know, 3 a.m. and make $25 for it. Like, I wasn't doing that. I didn't have aspirations of making it a profession, and I was obviously a little older than them. But at the same time, I could still relate to the fact of, you know, because I'm pretty anal, so I had a full routine, like the day of a show. I go work out, I go tan, I take a shower, I pack all my gear, I drive, I get to the show like at least 2.5 hours before the show, I eat, you know, get ready for the show. You have the show, you have to drive home. Like that time you're in the ring is like 10, 15 minutes. But the thing is, you've already had, you know, a long day. And some people would work out in the ring before the show, and like, so they were already tired. So it's like in that 10 to 15 minutes, you not only have to have the physical energy to do your match and have that physical intensity, but the thing that I don't think a lot of people realize, even people that have wrestled and some people that are probably new to wrestling, is that what was harder than having the emotional energy or the cardiovascular, you know, wind to get through a match was having that emotional energy to continue to personify that character and engage the crowd and show emotion and be intense. Like, because that's what gets the people going is when they can see that you're, you know, into it, engaged and believe in it, that translates to the audience. And like, for me, that was always the challenge. And there were times where I had that emotional energy and I was fired up and I was able to translate it to the crowd. And there were other times where I just didn't have it. I just, you know, I went through the motions, and like, I mean, that's a match, but that's not what people paid their money to see.
Yeah.
And that, I mean, that was a challenging thing. And I'm sure, I guess anybody that performs can probably relate to that concept.
Mm-hmm.
But that was the thing that I don't think people that come into pro wrestling understand. They're like, oh, I got, you know, cardio for days, I can wrestle for 60 minutes. Like, but can you have that emotional energy? Can you channel that character or that persona and that emotion and connect with the crowd during your time in the ring and engage them, so they're not on their phone or they're not looking at, you know, the one pretty girl that's at the show. Like they're actually engaged in your character and what's happening in the ring. And that's challenging to do. And, you know, especially with short attention spans and, you know, this day and age, like I said, with cell phones and, you know, social media. And it's a challenge to generate that emotional energy.
I'm so glad that I had a phase of when I was in a band playing. I got to experience performing in front of people before there was cell phones. When they actually fucking paid attention to what you had going on and got into the shit. I could only imagine what it was like, especially those last few years trying to compete with that shit. That has to be terrible.
But, yeah, I mean, and well, I was just going to say that, like, you know, that you had to find a way to. There had to be something about you that was unique, or something that engaged the people. And for some people, it was the crazy moves they did. For some people, it was their character. You know, for me, it was kind of the promos that I would cut, you know, and the character and the charisma and the fact that, you know, I was very hateable. I think that's what, you know, kind of kept the fans, like, at least partially engaged with my character.
Working heels, so much fun. All right, we're getting way ahead of ourselves, which is totally cool because, like I said, we were talking about before. I never plan any of this shit. We just kind of let it roll. I don't want to get too far before we get done with school real quick. You said you were about 5 or 6 months training. Did it just progressively go through, like, first you learn these 2 things, then you learn these 2 things? When did they start teaching you the psychology of it, essentially, instead of just doing moves when you should do them because it makes sense in the match?
TS was very good about that. And, he kind of started weaving that in from, I think, early on, and kind of feeding us a little bit and relating it to what we were learning or what we had learned. So that I think we were learning it without necessarily consciously knowing we were learning it. But at the same time, you know, as good of a teacher as he was, you know, all the knowledge he imparted, you learn that stuff from being out there in front of a crowd, from having matches, and more importantly, from having matches with people who have more experience than you or who are better than you.
Yeah.
And so that's where I think, you know, it really clicked. And I'm not saying that I, you know, learned all there was to learn, because I didn't. But I think the knowledge that I did have and that I was able to apply, you know, obviously I got that foundation from TS when we were training, but I got more of it from watching the people that knew what they were doing out there, being in the ring with them, talking to them, you know, either before a show or during the show or after a show about, oh, why did you do this then? Or why, you know, and them also giving feedback and say, hey, you should have done this here, or you should have waited, or you should have drawn this out more, you know, to get that reaction. And that's something that, I mean, I think I kind of got it, but I think there were people that definitely got it more. And then there's some people that just don't get it.
Yeah.
They just want to go out there and do moves, boom, boom, boom. And there's not even really a shred of psychology. And that's, I mean, you can get the people interested in your match if you do a bunch of crazy moves, but at the end of the day, what really gets them excited is telling that story and telling an engaging story that they actually, you know, give a shit about.
In training, because there's such a thing as somebody usually, quote unquote, calls the match, decides, you know, how things are going to go and kind of is the general in the ring. Were you learning how to call a match in training, or is that something they're like, I figured out, you know, later on? I mean, when did you get into the whole, all right, it's your decision how this is going to flow, let's do it?
I think we learned some of that in training, but I mean, that also was something that we learned from kind of trial and error, frankly, out there doing it. Because especially early on, a lot of times we were wrestling a fellow trainee. So we were kind of, you know, both learning by trial and error, getting thrown in the fire. But also we would learn from working with veterans or people that had, you know, could give us tips. But that one was, I think, more so than the psychology was kind of, you know, on the job training. And that was something that, you know, you kind of learned what worked, what didn't. And that could apply to what worked with the person you were in the ring with, but also what worked with the audience, you know. So it was kind of a twofold thing. It's like, okay, the two people in the ring have to be able to pull this off, have to be able to communicate, have to be on the same page and kind of pull this off in a way that looks like it's a fight or, looks entertaining. But it also has to be something that the fans are going to buy or care about, and not be on their phones.
Let me ask you this. So you're wrapping up with your training. It's your first quote unquote post-training match, or whatever you would consider your first professional match, somewhere along the line in the training.
Oh, we had that 2 months in.
Okay, cool. Then who are you wrestling? What town are you in? How was the experience?
It was like December 18th or 19th, I don't remember, 2004. It was in Worthington, Minnesota, and it was at I think it was called the Long Branch Saloon. So it was like this big kind of country bar.
Okay.
And Worthington, Minnesota is actually the town where my parents met, which is kind of ironic. But it was a tag match. So it was 4 of us trainees in the match, and it was me and AJ Smooth against Max Force and Nick Mayhem. And yeah, it was probably pretty much a clusterfuck. But I mean, I think it was a great step to finally get in there and do it for real. And for a legitimate promotion, and as opposed to kind of the half yarder stuff that I'd been doing previously. But yeah, that was a crazy night. The other thing I remember about that night is, like I said, because, especially because we were the newbies, we, definitely had to, help tear down and put up the ring. And they had parked the ring truck in an alley behind the bar, and we had to, tear down the ring and take it out and load it onto the trailer after the show. And I've looked it up. That night, the wind chill was like -20.
Oh,
it
so
was
lame.
Fucking cold. And it was like, it's like, oh, welcome to the business, kid. Like, sure. We didn't get paid, and we had to like haul the ring out to the truck or the trailer in the alley in like -20-degree weather. It was like, but we were glad to, have been there and had the experience. And it obviously got better after that. But yeah, that was how the 6 of us made our pro wrestling debut that night.
Holy crap. Did you already have a lineup on a promotion you were going to work for post-training? How did you get a gig when you were done training?
Yeah, so TS had been working with closely Troy Peterson, who runs Impact Pro Wrestling and has for more than 20 years now. So that is who we started with. That is who we were going to shows while we were training to help put up the ring. We would do some training in the ring before the shows. I think a few times we even got in there as kind of like extras and got fed to somebody and took moves a couple times. So yeah, we had our in. Now we had to earn our spots, and not everybody got, kind of inserted into the shows, at the same time. And that was because, they had talented wrestlers. They had experienced wrestlers. And it's like they had 6 guys that wanted to be on those shows now. And it's like we had to prove ourselves. There had to be something for us to, to show that we deserve to be on those shows. And I actually, when I was doing the backyard stuff, I had a name, I had a character, and that's what I was going to do. I was going to be that character. And the promoter had come to me and wanted me to do a character that was not blatantly, but kind of insinuated to be a Nazi.
What?
And like,
shut the
do
fuck
this
up.
German gimmick. No, he wanted me to do this German gimmick, and my last name's Wagener.
Yeah.
And I had a shaved head, and I was like, I had this punk rock Tony Sly character that I wanted to use, but the other thing that I was like, I didn't really feel comfortable with it, and why I ultimately said thanks but no thanks, I guess I'll wait. Was because at the time I was a community organizer working in Des Moines, and I was actually working on a campaign to organize the Sudanese community in Des Moines. And it's like, you know, pro wrestling's a work. I know pro wrestling's a work. But like, if there was something that were to come out that, hey, you know, that guy that's a community organizer working with the Sudanese is this Nazi on the weekends as a pro wrestler, it's like, you know, that's not a good look. So
No.
I was not going to jeopardize. And I know Troy wasn't happy about it. And as a result of me kind of shooting that down, I didn't get my quote unquote spot, you know, probably for another, I don't know, it was like I had to wait another 2 to 4 months probably before I finally got inserted and I got to do, you know, the Tony Sly character. But it was like, I appreciate the opportunity, but like, this is a fucking hobby that I'm making peanuts for. I'm not going to jeopardize my, you know, full-time job. Not that I was making much more at that, but I'm not jeopardizing that full-time job, you know, to be this, insinuate that I'm like this German skinhead on the weekends on your pro wrestling shows. It's like, no thanks.
I didn't know that. You never told me that. That's not a lot of people have heard that story. Oh my God. So, it's, Torturous Tony Sly is what I would consider a classic professional wrestling villain, in my opinion. Tell the people, what's the character, Torturous Tony Sly, or whatever? I know you went through different incarnations of Tony Sly. At the core, what was that character all about?
Yeah, so I mean, initially the character was, I mean, to go back to the classic line from, I don't know if it's Steve Austin or The Rock, but, and there have probably been others that have said it, you know, the best characters were the person with the volume turned up, like that actual person. So, you know, I am a fan of punk rock, and I was a skateboarder for a cup of coffee. So, like, my character was this mouthy, you know, villainous, you know, punk rock skateboard character. And initially that worked. And I went through a phase where I kind of did like a little bit of a crybaby shtick. But ultimately you have to reinvent yourself. You have to evolve. And so I got to a point where I was like, I need to put a new spin on this. And I think it was in 2007. So it was kind of like halfway through, you know, my time wrestling. Maybe it's 2007, 2008. Anyway, I decided that I was going to reinvent myself as the intellectual punk Tony Sly, because I legitimately do have a master's in public policy. And it's like, I was going to be the, you know, intelligent punk that was better than everybody else, but was still had this punk edginess. It's like, you know, hey, I listen to punk rock. I consider myself a punk. I have this degree. I'm gonna, you know, focus that and translate that into my character. So I would talk down to people. I would use big words. I started wearing like a tie to the ring and, you know, the black horn rimmed glasses. So it was just a different take on the character, but it was a take that was very real. It's like, hey, I have a legitimate master's in public policy, and 98% of you know, fuckers in the crowd that bought a ticket don't even have don't have a master's degree, and a lot of them didn't have, you know, a college degree. So it was like, it was a great villainous persona. It was like, we don't like this guy because he doesn't like the music we like, but also he thinks he's smarter than us and he's going to talk down to us. So it was definitely a good evolution, and I enjoyed that character, and I think it was probably more successful, more believable. But the problem was, about the time I came out with that character was the time that, you know, Damian Sandow's character on WWE TV comes out as this intellectual who was from Stanford and used all these big words. And it's like, he didn't have the punk component, but the whole, like, I'm smarter than you, I'm using big words, I have this, you know, highfalutin education, was very similar. And it's like, I had come up with the character before he premiered on TV, but I think the time I debuted that change in the character and the time that he debuted was around the same time. But thankfully, I don't think too many people like accuse me of ripping off that character.
No, because let's be honest, the Damien Sandow character was just a ripoff of the Genius Lanny Poffo character from the 90s, so...
Yeah, but he did do it really well. Like,
oh, yeah, he did it well, but I mean... There's no original ideas. Everyone's kind of something, but I think especially the market you were in, because it's like pro wrestling, especially over the years, it's always worked well. Were in interesting areas. I think, especially the rural type of areas. That's why I was a big fan of the classic NWA shit back in the day. Because watching the bad guys shit on the locals was the best part, and then the locals getting all fucking pissed, like. Andy Kaufman did he work Memphis cutting the promos about what soap is and shit to the people, that sort of stuff.
Oh, that was tremendous, yeah.
You know what I mean? I've always gotten a kick out of the bad guy really shitting on the people, so I could see why that would work, especially in Iowa, because you work in the Midwest, because you work in some small towns, and so you could, be a total dick about, everything. That'd be fantastic.
Yeah, I was not relatable. Like, my character was not relatable to 85% of the fans that we were in front of. And that's why I was so much more, I guess, successful, and I felt more comfortable as a villain. Like, when I had to be a good guy, the only thing that my only crutch was that I could cut some promos that were funny. Like, I could incorporate humor, but it's like, I wasn't this small, sympathetic guy. I wasn't the, good-looking, pretty boy. I didn't have this jacked physique that, all the guys wanted to be and all the girls wanted to be with. So it was a real challenge. When I had to be a good guy, it's like my toolkit shrunk incredibly. Like, I can't be, the pretentious, I'm looking down on you, badass looking asshole anymore. I have to be somebody that you want to root for and get behind. And so it was basically, I had to hope that the person I was wrestling was really hated, and I had to hope that I, made some comments in my promo or something that made people laugh and want to get behind me.
I don't ever remember you wrestling babyface.
I did. It was probably maybe, I mean, I don't know the exact breakdown, but it was probably close to, maybe 20 to 35% of the time, if that. And some of those were one-off shows where there wasn't a storyline, or there wasn't, it was just like we were at a county fair show or something.
Okay. Let me ask you this. I think I know what the answer is, but do you prefer bad guy over good guy?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people would say it's more fun. And for me, not only was it more fun, the character was more realistic. The character was more convincing. The character was more engaging, more entertaining, more, everything that you're supposed to do as a pro wrestler, I did better as a bad guy. The one, I guess, drawback for some people, especially those that are trying to make this a living or make a profession out of it, is, it's tougher to sell merchandise.
Yeah.
So the good, that was kind of an incentive for some people to be a good guy. It's like, hey, I can sell my 8x10s and my T-shirts. Like, the running joke was that, I think I said it in one of my last promos wrestling was, it took me 2.5 years to sell 28x10s. Like, and that was a shoot. Like, that legitimately, as a bad guy, I couldn't sell them. There was a show in like Crystal Lake, Iowa once where I was a good guy one night and I sold like 7 of my 8x10s. Unfortunately, I was only selling them for $3 back then as opposed to $5, so I didn't make as much money. But yeah, I mean, it wasn't, there was one night where I was really, to use the insider term, over as a babyface, where the fans were like, really behind me, and there was a loud reaction. And that was January of 2016 when I came back after my Achilles. So they hadn't seen me in like 9 months. And so, from watching wrestling that even if somebody was a bad guy, but they, get an injury and they come back,
yeah,
they're going to get that, baby face pop, a la Triple H in Madison Square Garden in 2000 or whatever, 2002, whenever that was. And so it did happen. And I also had a lot of friends there that were, really behind me. But like that night, I was it was quite a loud reaction, but like after that, it kind of subsided, and I think I became a bad guy within another 3 to 4 months. But yeah, it was, for me, it was very lopsided. The people that are the best and the most talented and the most successful can do both.
Yeah.
And I was able to do both technically, but I was much better as a villain. And I think it was in the best interest of the promoter and me and the fans for me to be a bad guy.
Yeah, I can't imagine. I don't take this the wrong way, but I couldn't imagine rooting for you. You're way more fun to boo.
Yeah, most definitely. And that's why I said it was better for the fans and the promoters. I mean, people were going to not necessarily pay to see, I wasn't the person that was drawing the house. I wasn't the person that people were paying to see. But if they did pay their money and they're like, oh, Tony Sly's on the show, if Tony Sly was on the show and he was a bad guy, it was probably a more enjoyable experience for those fans than if Tony Sly had been a good guy.
Yeah, it's interesting that being in a position where you want the people you're entertaining to shit on you. It's such an interesting dynamic. That's why I'm fascinated with pro wrestling.
That's the thing. I mean, the people that really embrace being a villain, the best feeling that they can have, and I've experienced this on a handful of occasions, like on big matches. The best feeling that I had in the ring was not like when I hit this big move or when I won this championship, is when the good guy beat me and the crowd went ape shit. Like, like when I think the biggest one was probably when I was wrapping up. I had a loser leaves Des Moines match with James Jeffries, and it was the fans bring the weapons. So the fans were engaged, and somebody was leaving, and I obviously lost that match. And I've kept the stipulation. I have not wrestled in Des Moines since. But when he pinned me, I remember laying there, and I mean, it's the match is out there on YouTube, and it's probably one of the matches that I'm most proud of, and was one of the better matches, more entertaining matches. But the fans went apeshit, because James Jeffries was their favorite wrestler, and he got to stick around, and this guy that they booed and hated for years is gone, and he's laying there, in a crumpled heap on the mat. And like, that is when, somebody that really gets into the villain role is going to take the most pride, is when they have, done the honors, as we say, and the crowd is cheering because they've lost.
Yeah, nothing beats a good old loser leaves town match. Classic.
Exactly.
The only thing that beats it is the guy coming back in a mask.
I didn't do that. I mean, it was legitimately like, and I remember there was, there is a mouthy youth fan who comes to all the Des Moines shows, and like the first time that I didn't go back, like even buying a ticket, until I think it was the next year, or maybe even very late that year. And the first time I came back to Des Moines, and I, like I said, bought a ticket, just trying to be Danny Wagener, not Tony Sly, having a beer with my friends. And this mouthy kid comes over, you lost a loser leaves town. Like, I'm not here to wrestle, dipshit. Like, I bought a ticket like you did, although you probably actually didn't buy a ticket, because, I mean, this kid the boys called him Little Pesci, because he was like this fat little kid that looked like Joe Pesci. But, like, he actually took my chain wallet after one of the shows and, like, tried to blame it on one of his friends. I'm like, I mean, yeah, so he was... Those are the things that I don't miss.
Holy Mark.
Like dealing with obnoxious fans.
That's funny. Oh, it's fun to be in the crowd yelling at you motherfuckers, but dude, even at the independent level, that sounds like they get a little creepy sometimes.
Yeah, it does. And thankfully I didn't have to deal with much of that, because I was a bad guy. So I didn't have people coming up to me like, stalking me, but I would have people come up to me out in public and be like, hey, Tony, blah, blah, blah. And, since I've been going to the shows as a fan, like I have, if a kid comes up to me and calls me Tony and wants me to sign something, I did for a little bit, but then I got to the point where it's like, I'm not Tony Sly and I don't owe you anything. Like I refused. There was this one creeper who wanted me to like take pictures with his kids and sign stuff, and I refused. I straight out refused. And like I'm kind of at the point now where the next time I go to a show, whenever that is, like if somebody calls me Tony, I'm going to be like, hey, I appreciate you being a fan and whatnot, and supporting pro wrestling, but like I'm not Tony, I'm Danny. It's just like I've joked about coming to a show wearing like a homemade T-shirt that says I'm not Tony Sly. Like
that'd be cool.
I just yeah. So I know that not everybody makes the transition that way, but that's how I've done it, and that's what really confirms to me that it was time to be done. And I don't regret it. Like I'm glad that I did it for that 12 years. I don't regret that, but it was like, it was definitely time to move on. And some people can't do that. And, they keep sticking around and, even if they only wrestle so often or they, have a role as a ring announcer or manager or whatever. And it's just like, no, if I'm going to a show, I just want to laugh with my buddies and have a good time and, throw back some beers.
Well, that makes sense. And you almost kind of answered where I was going anyway, because I want to kind of get this wrapped up because we're running out of time. But do you ever see yourself participating at that level again? Or is it just I'm strictly a fan? Or could they possibly get you for some reunion show or some shit like that?
No. And I mean, the two reasons that I'm pretty confident in saying that is, one, I really don't have the desire. But, there are people that come back because there's somebody close to them that has that, desire for them to do it. Like one, my daughter, I brought her to one show right before I finished up, and like she started crying 90 seconds into the match. So she's not a fan of pro wrestling. She doesn't want me to do it again. So I don't have that issue. Like I think Goldberg came back because his son wanted to see him wrestle or something. And the other thing is, my girlfriend is a wrestler and has been wrestling actively, before I was done and after. And I haven't come back and done anything with her. Like I haven't come back to manage her or tag with her or do an angle with her or anything. And she hasn't asked me to. The promoter hasn't asked me to. And it's like I have no desire to do that. Like I'll come, and she's a villain too. So it's like I'll come and boo her, but I support her, obviously I'm there to support her, but it's like, I don't have that bug. And I guess you can never say never, but I'm pretty confident. I mean, the fact that I'm going on 3 years with not doing anything, like I haven't come back to, do anything official on the show. Like if people have recognized me or called me Tony Sly or whatever, but like no formal role, and I haven't had that desire. So yeah, I think, and also, part of the reason is I went out in the best way possible. Impact Pro Wrestling does a huge show at the Dan Gable Museum for their Hall of Fame weekend, with the Luthez George Tragos Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame every year in July, although unfortunately this year it was canceled.
Yeah.
And so that's their biggest show. Like there's 400 or 500 people there. It's the atmosphere. It's like they're WrestleMania. And like my last match was losing to probably the most popular IPW wrestler of the last, probably 6 to 8 years at least, James Jeffries. And it's like, there was no better way to go out. I lost to the most popular good guy on the biggest show in a match that I was proud of. And, that was the best send off for me. Like I can't do any better than that. So, why come back and even try?
Yeah, I'm going to say you can't beat that. And you don't want to be Flair. You don't want to be coming back and look like an asshole either. So, no, that's definitely cool.
Well, no, and also at the time that I hung it up, I remember I did the math. There were 5 wrestlers on the active roster that were born after I graduated high school.
Oh,
so I was like, yeah, I need to be done. Yeah.
Oh, good choice. Well, you were good at your craft. I enjoyed booing you. So we're going to have to... Oh, go ahead.
I did my best to entertain, and I've actually been, frankly, I've been very flattered, since the time that I've been done, the number of people that have come up and said, hey, when you coming back, or I miss, watching your matches, or I miss having you on the show. And I'm frankly, I'm flattered. I'm also surprised. Like, I was a piece of the show. I played a role, but I was never the main role. I was not, one of the most valuable components of Impact Pro Wrestling or whatever promotion I wrestled for. So the fact that fans still remember and come up to me, is very flattering. I appreciate it. So I'm glad that I was able to entertain those folks by, having them boo me and be happy when I lost or whatever. But it's a chapter that, I've closed. Like I said, I have fond memories. I don't regret doing it. But it was time for, Tony Sly to, leave the ring for the last time and, give an opportunity to countless other talented, young, hungry wrestlers that are going to do a better job of entertaining the fans than I was able to do.
Cool. You're a noble man, my friend.
Yeah, don't tell anyone that was a fan of Tony Sly. It'll ruin my image.
All right. Shh. Sweet. Well, I appreciate you stopping by the show. We should talk again next time post Corona. We can do it in the studio, or at least go to a local show.
Definitely.
I haven't been to any local shows since I moved back to town, so we need to hook up.
Yeah, definitely. It's a fun time. Like, go, and it's a lot of the old CFWA guys that go. So like, there was one show I went to where, it was like Gage Octane and Brent Fillmore on one side of me and Real Deal and Attitude Chris Ryan on the other. So it's like, it's cool to go to shows with those guys and have a good time on the other side of the ring.
Heck yes. Right on, dude. Well, thanks again. It was a good chat. We'll catch up down the road. I appreciate it, bud.
Thank you very much for having me. I enjoyed it.
Thank you for listening to Middle Age Crazy, the show that proves being an adult doesn't have to suck. Brought to you by moonsaltmusic.info. Underground and independent hip-hop for the old heads. Free downloads available now. All show inquiries can be sent to middleagecrazypod@gmail.com. Find us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube at middleagepod. Call us at 515-478-3412. Ask for Janice. Middle Age Crazy is a Greg Valentine and Clarence J. Washington production.